Welcome back to Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate Prowler. Only last time we took on a Hyper Diablos and a Hyper Mizutsune. This time we're going back to the lower ranks and taking on a bunch of bird wyverns and I think maybe a Leviathan. I don't remember specifically which ones we're actually going to be fighting because I have not practiced them. Like I said before, there's not really too many differences between them, and the big ones aren't actually that big. So first quest we're going to be taking on is called Revenge from the Skies. Has us hunting a hyper young Kutku in the Ancestral Steppe. This one has actually a pretty interesting elemental matchup. It may not matter really that much in the long run, but I've got a thunder weapon equipped, and we'll go ahead and head on out. All right, hyper young Kutku. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the elemental differences right off the bat before I forget them. So ice is the better general element. However, there's some interesting play between your cutting and blunt weapons. On the face, it is, I believe, a 72 hit zone for a blunt weapon. It's a little bit less. It's like 59, which actually is quite a bit. And it may be 75 for the blunt weapon. And cutting is about 59, something like that. So that's actually a pretty decent drop, percentage-wise. However, you're dealing a fairly decent amount more of ice damage on the head compared to thunder element damage. The trade-off is that on the wings, they are not actually a weak spot for blunt weapons, if I'm remembering correctly. I literally just looked this up, so if I'm forgetting about it, then that's kind of sad. But the cutting weapon has like an 80 hit zone, which is really good. So that's by far the best raw hit zone is cutting on the wings. And thunder element is actually better slightly than ice on the wings. Now, everywhere else, it just kind of falls apart. So, not falls apart, it's slightly worse. So, you know, it's not the best in the world. It's not the worst in the world. You know, it's just kind of that second place element. But since it is better on the wings and cutting is also really just great on the wings, at the very least raw-wise, I decided to use the thunder element weapon here. Now, it doesn't really matter that much if you do go ahead and just use the Snow Baron stick. That one would probably work better because this is not our final thunder weapon. But again, that's going to take a bit for me to actually get to be able to use it. So either one's fine. You'll just be going mostly for the head. The neck is actually the best spot for ice element, which I think is a whopping 40, which is pretty good. I think the neck for both cutting and blunt is 42. So it's not, you know, a weak spot. You're not going to be triggering weakness exploit or anything, but that is a very high amount of ice element combined with the very high amount of ice element on the Snow Baron stick. So that's actually pretty good. But other than that, it's a young Kutku. He likes to run around a lot and fly around. He does have an interesting attack with the Khonshu, and I don't remember if he does do it in just standard G rank play and, you know, non-hyper form and whatnot, but he will pick them up and kind of throw them at you. Think of something like Sergios picking up something and throwing it at you, or maybe Garuka does it at some point. I don't think he does, though. There's another monster that I'm thinking of that throws Khonshu at you, but I can't quite remember it off the top of my head. Took me a minute to get here, so we're not going to fight him for very long before he starts to move away, though. All right, so this is obviously a bit of an interesting area with the dual layers, and it can be a bit annoying. Thankfully, I believe he can just fly up at any point. Now, he may actually have to find a hole to drop through, and maybe not. We'll see. Yeah, it looks like he's trying to find a hole, which is good. We'd rather have the on the ground. That way there's no shenanigans with, you know, not being able to dig or something like that. He's taking his sweet time getting over here, though. Maybe he can just drop if he, like, slams his face into the ground or something. I want to say that may be possible. He's not really interested in actually making a quick move, though, so I'll just kind of attack him from up here. The ground does still act as a block for your boomerang, so you may be able to clip the hitbox, you know, going through the ground. But it will, you know, stop your boomerang's, you know, movement, I guess, if I can speak once again. He really just does not want to fall, and maybe he can't fall. I doubt that, though. I would assume he'd be able to. He started on the ground, I think. Maybe not. Maybe we have to fight him up in the air. He's going to probably go down as soon as I get up here, but that's okay. He's going to dash forward. This one, I believe, had fireballs going out, but he ended it so quickly that it didn't really matter at all. And don't forget that the hyper spot is stronger or weaker as usual. I think it's about 14% from what I remember, so it may actually beat out the wings as a good spot as long as the wings don't get hyper spot too. Because Obviously, if it switches off of the face, then you're not dealing as much as you would be on the wings. And if it switches to the wings, then you're dealing even more damage there. All to say, it doesn't matter that much. It's a Kutku. Don't expect too much from him unless you're like in starter G rank gear or something, and maybe then, you know, he'll be actually doing a lot of damage to you. But other than that, he's not special. Go for the face break if you want the face. I don't even think you can break the wings. And the tail, maybe you can cut. I don't remember. I don't remember Kutku tails being a specific part that I needed, so cutting them was probably not the first priority of anything. It looks like a tail you can cut. It does certainly look long enough to be able to chip off, and maybe you can. It's a bit awkward for Blade Masters to actually try to attack because unlike something like Rathalos or Rathian, their tails are a bit thicker with that bird wyvern skeleton, so they're actually easier to hit. Obviously us, we kind of just get our pick of the hit zones wherever we're at, so it's not anything to worry about since we aren't like a other bow gun where they have to use slicing shots or bow doing weird things. We actually have a better chance of cutting it, but again, if there's no reason to cut it, I don't really go out of my way to do it unless I randomly just get it from a Mega Boomerang. And the face hasn't broke it yet. It is not like a Garuga face. It doesn't break that quickly. Kind of a weird, actually, quirk of the monster itself that it breaks that quickly. I mean, he has a whole variant based on his face being scarred, so, you know, that's kind of a thing they've built into him. In fact, I think that was from his first debut in Dose. That was a thing. It wasn't explicitly stated as a thing until, like, Iceborne, I think, where it's called Scarred Young Garuga, but I think there were just some variants of it that were maybe a bit stronger and their face was scarred from the beginning. But, you know, we have Deadeye Young Garuga, which is another take on that, where I don't remember if it's just like, I'm thinking of stories terms, which is bad because deviants aren't like a genetic thing or a mutation or anything. They're more of a something bad happened to me and I outgrew it. And you can't really do that with baby monsters, but they kind of just have that, which is weird. But either way, back to young Kutku. Yeah, he keeps falling over. He's poisoned now. I don't really expect this to go on maybe for much longer. I expect 15 minutes max, and that's being very generous with how slow I'm taking. But I'm, you know, kind of out of practice, and I'm not being as aggressive as I could be, especially with all these flinches that I'm getting. So I'll try to be a little bit more aggressive there. Throw this one out here. Those should not hit me because you can't really aim those that well. We get that out. I'm perfectly fine with that. Don't mind training damage because once again, we're not taking that much. I'm going to throw this out, dodge to the left. Get out of the way of those. Now they can, I believe, change direction a bit or velocity. So they will land shorter sometimes and they'll land a little bit further away other times. So you do have to be careful about that if you are in the line of sight. Maybe you can kind of directionally influence them a bit. Kind of looks that way, but not much. Certainly not like, you know, Rathalos turning and shooting a fireball at you, or even him at some point. That was a nice little snipe there. Broke its face too. That actually is a subquest. I think that's the only subquest. Just maybe there's another part, but I didn't see another part breaking. Again, I don't think you can break too many parts on him other than the face. That's kind of the big thing you're going for anyways. It's the nice, soft, juicy spot for most weapons. It may not be a weak spot for shot type weapons, but they usually don't get a great pick of hit zones, unfortunately. But yeah, he's limping away, so I guess I'll see you there. Now I moved to this area. I don't think he sleeps here. I don't know if this is like a last, you know, step before he gets to the sleeping area, because this is certainly not a safe spot for a monster to sleep. At the very least, I wouldn't figure. As far as I'm aware, there's no monsters that sleep here either. It's either the top left or the top right area, or top middle, I guess. There is a top right and a top middle. Be a little confusing. Can actually climb up pretty quick as well, though. Again, he's not slow. You know, he's fun in the sense that he's a punching bag that kind of bites back a little bit. Not too much, not too little either. You know, it's just kind of that slight easy time. You know, you don't have to think too much about fighting him because if you do make a mistake, you're not punished too badly for it, but it does feel pretty satisfying to actually get some combos and stuff off on him. You know, it's the same in low rank, same in high rank, just kind of that neutral, very easy monster if you have good gear, and if you don't, then you do have to be careful of him. And there we go. After 2 Mega Boomerangs and what would have been a third one, he finally goes down. Like I said, not that hard. So I'll go ahead and carve him up, meet you back at base. All right, back to the hub. Our fire weapon is equipped, and our next monster actually has something I've never noticed before, which is fairly interesting. So the dex that I'm using has 2 separate hit zones for the monster on its head and legs, and I know this is a bit weird since we actually haven't gotten into it yet, but I found that pretty interesting. I'll talk about it a bit more, but the Verdant Hills Are Alive is the quest we're taking, has us hunting a Hyper Gypceros. We'll go ahead and head on out. And we spawn immediately with it. So yeah, the head in low rank is apparently 45, and then in high rank and G rank it is 42, which isn't much, and especially for us, since we can't use weakness exploit, doesn't matter too much. That's only 3%, you know, less damage, which I guess is somewhat, you know, non-negligible depending on how min-max you're trying to be. But remember, hyper spots, you know, make things a bit weird. 14% extra damage. So I find it interesting. The legs work similarly. I don't remember the exact numbers on the legs, though. It's like 36 to something, or 27, which is a bit sharper, or something like that. But we're not aiming for the legs anyways. The body itself and the neck as well is kind of your cluster of weak spots that you're aiming for. Fire is the best, and it actually deals 30 on the head, which is the best, and it kind of goes down throughout various body parts. Ice is your second, where it only deals 20 at some points. You know, it's not going to be as good, where fire deals 20 at a lot of points. Ice is either going to deal 10 or 20, so you don't have as much scaling there. That's really good. And pretty much what we're going to be doing is aiming for the cluster, kind of in the body there. Pretty much all of it's a weak spot, especially if you're using weakness exploit. Obviously, you can go for the head because that is a weak spot. So if you really want that crystal on its head, then you can go for that. And also another interesting thing, if you watch these things falling from the sky, he actually is very weird. Kind of makes me think of like Atolkal launching its little trash balls or whatever it is. So also another interesting thing, got quite a few interesting things with this monster. I was saying earlier about how gunner hit zones aren't always great, but the gunner hit zones actually are quite decent here. I think they're a 70 for at the very least the low rank, if not the high rank hit as well, and it may be a bit lower there. I didn't check the high rank version for the cutting hit zone, but, or sorry, the shot type hit zone, but the tail is actually a whopping 80. So if you got a spread bowgun or a bow, you know, bow's probably the best, honestly, for it, because you kind of have that spread. Plus, I guess if you want to use a pierce bow, I don't think pierce bows are that common outside of, you know, obviously long monsters with pretty good weak spots. But if you're using normal type or spread type, that's actually really good to just go for the tail with. And the only real attack you have to worry about from the tail are the tail whips, and then the what do you call it? The little, they're both tail whips. One's a circular tail whip, and the other one kind of just has them lashing out with it, because it is a whip, I guess. It can extend and do weird things. I think it is somewhat okay of a weak spot for us as a cutting weapon user, but it's not, again, gonna matter that much. It's a Gypceros, unless it's like super beefed up event Gypceros, which I don't even remember if there is one. It doesn't matter. Just deal damage to it if you have in-game gear, and you're gonna take it down somewhat decently quickly. Obviously, if you're doing TA runs, you can't do that. You're going for all of that, but again, that doesn't matter that much. You're just trying to have fun with the game. Just have fun with the game. It doesn't really make much sense to try to min-max one of these lower range monsters, especially multiplayer, because you're gonna have twice, if not triple the damage, or even quadruple. Just depends on how it goes. Always be in mind whenever he does do the little pecs, he can charge up his crystal with that. Don't think he can do it in low rank. He probably can do it in high rank though. So, you know, that doesn't carry over too much. I do think he can store a charge though in G rank, and that may be different from high rank. Again, these differences for the lower monsters are kind of hard to figure out. And he faked me out there. I thought he was doing a tail whip, but he did the face, or the little crystal explosion there. But again, the lower rank monsters, you tend to actually fight them a lot more in low rank. So anything in high rank and G rank kind of just get mixed together, because by the time you do get to high rank, you may not be fighting them as often to get gear or whatnot, or just kind of build up your foundation of materials. Obviously, if you're playing the high rank version of the game, then you're going to be fighting them a lot more there. But I've played this game for so long now that it kind of just does mesh together, so it's hard to remember. Obviously, there are a few, key points, and the later monsters you do notice differences, like Mizutsune having different combos and stuff like that, or Glavenus, having, any of the flagships, obviously, are going to have some notable attacks in G rank that aren't quite there in high rank, but that's, similar from the step up from low rank to high rank, where they have their own special attacks as well that are very notable and can catch you off guard. This guy really just likes shooting those things out into the air. They're very delayed as well. I found it kind of funny. And also, it looks like the peck can poison you. May have been a thing he could do before. I remember, I'm terrible at remembering these things, but it doesn't seem like he could. He's fixing to do that. There we go. I'm going to try to look for an opening since I have Go Fight Win. It may run out pretty quickly. This is a bit dangerous. That didn't flinch me, though. I don't know if it was just that it hit my Palico and I only got hit by the after effect of the poison, or if it did hit me and just didn't flinch me. I'd rather have that, honestly. This is gonna waste our Mega Boomerang, but it's okay. Touch to the left. Let him do his thing. I'm not gonna bother with trying to get a Mega Boomerang ready here, though. Kind of in a weird spot. Maybe try to bait a tail whip. Let's go for that. Real close to him. I can try this, though. Shouldn't take too much longer for him to be exhausted. Kutku got exhausted, but he wasn't exhausted very long. In fact, he won't get exhausted. I don't know why the Kutku got exhausted. That's kind of weird. Hyper monsters don't get exhausted, for reference, if you haven't watched these before. I just kind of forgot that because... And maybe it's just specifically the higher rank hypers. But at one point, the Kutku kind of looked like it was spitting out just spit when it did its little flame tackle. And maybe that's a Kutku specific thing in hyper mode. I did realize that that was just a weird thing. I kind of just assumed, oh, well, it's exhausted, but no, they can't go exhausted. So that's kind of a special Kutku thing, probably. I think that's honestly better in terms of just talking about preference for the game. Honestly, these weaker monsters not getting tired makes them definitely more engaging to fight. Obviously, like I said before, they're not difficult, but if they're actually making you move around a lot more and you're not getting a full 30 seconds at least to wail on them with stuff and knock them over, then honestly, I'm kind of fine with that. It doesn't really, again, do much to make them, notably difficult unless you are fighting an event souped up version. But for the later monsters, I have seen mixed takes on the exhaustion kind of being annoying. I honestly don't notice it that much. Obviously, the big thing is that they're kind of similar to Elder Dragons. Obviously, Elder Dragons don't have spots that speed up and slow down their attacks, but in a way, since they don't get exhausted, they are faster sometimes and they can hit pretty hard in the later ranks. I kind of feel like that's just the Elder Dragon version of the regular monster. And if you look at the clear times, sometimes they are a bit skewed. Like Duramboros having like 20,000 something health. That's a lot. They will take a bit longer sometimes, especially if you're not utilizing the hyper spots as much, but I think that is trying to balance, and I'm not going to say they did it perfectly, but it is trying to balance you getting more Hunter Arts gauge and Prowler gauge. Well, I say Prowler gauge, but I doubt they really balanced anything around Prowlers other than nerfing them in the end game. Obviously, it's the easy weapon, I guess, so they don't want it to be too good, but I've already had my piece with that. But yeah, that's what I feel like about them. I don't hate them. They're not the best. I can't really think of any majorly good monsters that have a secondary form that are my favorite. That, obviously aside from subspecies and stuff, I'm talking about like the strong versions of monsters. Apex I didn't find particularly fun in 4. Frenzy are okay. I think these would be better if they didn't have as much of a health boost, right? That's the biggest thing I see people complaining about. The exhaustion isn't that as bad, as long as they're going down a bit faster and you're not having to slug away at them. But, I don't know. I understand it. Again, I think it could be fine-tuned a bit better, but with what we have, it could be worse. It could be like Iceborne, where the health blow and the defense values of the monsters in Master Rank specifically are just so high that you have to use tenderizing because that's the new mechanic, so they want you to use it. Very similar to Y-Stones in that regard, except it's on every single monster in Master Rank, as opposed to a few select monsters having Apex versions that, aren't. going to be on your farming list all the time unless you're looking for relics. And then, you know, you do have to play with the Whitestone game of let me sharpen my weapon and be able to attack it for a short period before I have to only go for super weak spots if the monster even has them. And I haven't experienced like in-game apexes because I just really am put off by them. I don't really want to fight them that much. Like the most I've probably fought are just like the tutorial one in the high rank story because I've played through the story quite a few times, but any actual G rank apexes I hardly ever actually fight. You know, it's more frenzied than anything. But 4 was really the time when they actually started introducing the special strong variants of monsters that, you know, aren't like specifically a variant or something. So we've not had necessarily too long with them. And as I've said before, you know, I think hypers are okay. Again, they could be balanced a bit better, but they're certainly not the worst of the pack. There can be worse. Anomaly is kind of just like a weird, overpowered hyper, if I could say, because, you know, you don't like get extra wire bug charge from attacking the anomaly spots on anomaly monsters, but you do get more damage for attacking those spots. So it is similar in that regard where you're building up something to deal more damage. They have different states though, where if you do deal enough damage, I believe, to the anomaly spots, then they do fall over and have a bit of a chance for you to catch up with the exhaustion and stuff. These monsters don't have that. And obviously, since it's a 5th gen game versus a 4th gen game, it's also another very large difference. So I don't know how well they would compare if hyper monsters were in a 5th gen game. And I'm not saying they should bring them back. I like it if they would continue just trying to experiment and see what works. But I don't also mind if the in-game just has strong regular monsters. You know, I don't think it's that bad. Try, I know, is very known for its limited roster of monsters, but I know it's also known for its unique monsters and, you know, just ones being fun to fight. Now, I never knew really much about the in-game of Tribe because that was kind of a weird thing. It was back in the time where they had online only servers and stuff, so once those got shut down, you can't really go back to them unless you do other things with the game. So, you know, if you're just buying the game and buying the console, you can't do anything just stock with the high rank village stuff because it's literally inaccessible. But with that rant out of the way, he should be going down pretty soon. I doubt I'll get the crystal break because I've not been going for the face, but we'll see how long this takes. Okay, well, I actually did get the crystal break, surprisingly. Something I've also been thinking about is in the system of Anomaly, talking about that, it's probably the worst part about Anomaly. If it were like Hypers and you could just fight a very strong monster or version of the monster outright, or say even this, just do 5 levels of the monster and get like the level 300 version, I think that would be fine, but my oh my, that grind is awful. It's absolutely terrible. I don't ever want to go through it again as much as I do like the late game Anomaly fights at the very last levels of the game. They are a lot of fun, especially in the correct gear, but they suffer a very amplified version. It's just kind of like GU but amplified. He's faking his death here, obviously. We know that because Quest Clear hasn't appeared, so we can keep going at him. This obviously won't finish him off, but it will still do some damage to him, which is free. But again, a lot of amplified stuff in Rise. The weird quest level system that works EXP based, but is very, you know, reminiscent of the leveling system from Deviant Monsters is something that could very easily be tuned to make it feel so much better. And Deviant Monsters were, I'd say, probably pretty bad on their own front because, you know, you have to do the quest 4 times if you're with 4 friends. So you can't just do it once and have everyone unlock it. But I'd say it's probably even worse because the Anomaly monsters have like 300 levels that you have to go through. Yes, it does kind of have a weird catch-up mechanic where once you get one monster to that level, you'll start unlocking more Anomaly quests at higher levels. But goodness, 300 is not what you need. If I were to tune the Deviant levels, it would be similar. Have 5, have 2 in low rank, 2 in high rank, and then, well, I mean, I don't know if 5's that worth it, actually. I guess you could do, okay, 5 in the base game, have 2 low rank, 2 in high rank, and then go ahead and have 4 in G rank. Well, okay, let me restart. I'm talking over myself so much. Okay, 2 in low rank, 3 in high rank, and that's your base game deviants. You get the general gist of it. I'd say probably do a regular quest in low rank, then a capture quest in low rank, and then repeat in high rank, and then go ahead and do the weird final. You really like to play that, don't you? Do the weird final, like, you know, monster in arena within another monster on the 5th level. And then for G rank, you can have another full 5 and do the weird, like, 1 faint loud and capture plus just the 2 monster version of it. I think that would work better. And then you can have the 16th AX version just as that as well. Or you could only do 4 and then just have the 16th as, or the 11th, or sorry, 10th as an EX version. I can't even think of this myself. Maybe it's too confusing. But I think that would be better. That would lessen the amount by 5, and that might not sound like much, but when you have, what, 16 monsters, something like that, that have deviant versions, that cuts down a lot of fluff quests that the deviant monsters dealt with. And again, in a similar way for the anomaly monsters, let me level it up slowly for 5, and then just give me like a 300 version when I reach HR 100 or something. That seems perfectly fine to me, but I don't know. I'm sure people have their preferences. It does certainly get you to grind a lot longer, but after a certain point, you know, grinds don't become as fun whenever you're just ticking up the number to fight the harder monster. Like, give me the hard monster to work towards. Don't just give me something to grind to get a stronger monster. Give me the stronger monster so I have to grind gear for the stronger monster, if that makes any sense. Either way, after the rant, I've carved them up and I'll meet you back at base. All right, back to the hub. We're going to keep our fire weapon equipped because, as you've seen, the next monster is a very weak fire monster, or monster weak to fire. He's not a fire monster. Would be a neat, I guess, subspecies, but speaking of Rise, that one added way too many subspecies of monsters that were like fire and stuff. Either way, the hype is royal, has us hunting a hyper royal Ludroth, if I can remember its name, wherever it is. I'm not very professional here. Either way, we're going to head on out. I had a feeling it was in the Misty Peaks because that's normally where he appears, but it could have also been on the deserted island, so I didn't want to say whether or not. But yeah, here's another low rank hyper monster, and I wouldn't even bother going for the hyper spots here, honestly. The main is so weak, and even after you break it, it doesn't lose any weakness at all, so just keep going for that with fire. It's like 40 fire damage you're dealing to it, and then like 80 cutting at the very least. I'm not quite sure about Blunt because we're not using Blunt, but it's very high, so just go for that. You'll take him down pretty quickly. I do believe you're trading off the head when you're using Blunt as opposed to the neck. I'm not quite sure what would count as the neck though, but for cutting. Neck would be better for cutting while the head would be better for Blunt, but you're just going for the main with everything that you're using here. So if you're using a hammer, I guess maybe it may not be as good, but hammer doesn't use element, so you're not as worried about dealing as much fire element damage as possible. So pick the head if that's better, but it's not that important for us here. It actually does feel pretty nimble though, which is pretty cool. Again, it's just like mini Legiocris. You know, it shares the skeleton, obviously. He doesn't have any electricity attacks or anything. He does shoot water at you, but other than that, you know, he does have the wide sweeping attacks and the tail flips and all that. You know, he can't swim in this game. He may be able to swim in a zone transition, but I don't even think he can do that, so doesn't even get that much. For being a royal monster, he's not that, you know, cool, I guess. I like his design, though. It's kind of cute, I guess. I don't know. It is regal and elegant, which I assume is what they're going for with this monster. But it is a dry monster, so obviously it's losing out on some abilities underwater. Not that I would really particularly enjoy underwater in the older gen. I'm curious to see if they're going to do it in new gen. I'm not going to say whether or not I want it either way. Obviously, if they do it, I hope it's fun, but I don't need it. I think the game honestly probably has, or the series has maybe bigger priorities right now at the time of recording this than whether or not we get underwater combat back. They did bring it back with Legiochris and Wilds a little bit. At the very least, in the high rank version, we'll see how that goes in the master rank expansion. But I didn't hate it, but it was more of a set piece, like a siege fight than anything else, with that little kind of tiny underwater section. Unfortunately, you are forced to go through it every time. It is fairly easy on the normal version, but the tempered version, my goodness, is also pretty difficult. Just trying to get through it fast. You know, obviously, if you take your time with it, it's not that hard to get enough staggers on him to make him do his whirlpool thing. But I'm talking a lot about other games, not Generations Ultimate. Again, these guys are more topic fodder than anything because they're not going to throw anything in my face that is going to particularly catch me off guard and take an acorn away or something. Also, we already broke the main. He's running away. Again, I don't think this will probably be the fastest out of them. So I already did my rant for the day. I think I'm going to just try to take this guy out. You know what to expect. It's just Royal Luja. So we'll see what we can do. Broke the crown. That's pretty cool. And I guess that is the subquest. So if you're looking for that randomly, you're not doing charm runs on a regular hunt. So I wouldn't think too hard about it other than extra rewards. I am curious how often people actually use subquests. I know in Dose. So Dose is interesting. That was the first game with subquests, but they weren't really called subquests. They weren't really treated as similarly to subquests, but you could still do the similar complete one. They're like 3 or something like that. I guess it depended on the quest. Some didn't have any, while some had up to 3. So Dose is actually a one time where you would actually use that strategically. If you're just having the hardest time on a hunt and you don't think you're going to complete it, which is much more likely in Dose, you're going to try to use that subquest system, especially early on. And, you know, that's obviously not impossible here. Like, if you're down to 1 cart, you don't think you're going to complete it, throw that subquest up there. You'll get some rewards. You'll get some cash for it. And you'll, you know, not technically have failed the quest. You'll just have completed the subquest. They did get rid of them, though, which I guess makes sense since you can just end the quest early anyways. Unfortunately, you don't get any extra rewards for that, so you're really reliant on part breaks and stuff. Which, if you're just going for part breaks, like Diablo Swords or something, then it is pretty nice to just be able to return and get the reward for that. But, I don't know. I kind of like the idea of subquests. They're not needed. Honestly, they're nice flavor stuff, but yeah, I can't really say they're like pivotal to the game or anything. Because again, if you're in-game, you don't use subquests leaving that much, and you have to complete it. You can't do it at any time, which I will say returning from quest is a lot more useful. So, you know, and there's also the distinction of returning from quests still keeps your items lost as opposed to abandoning, which means you don't get anything from it, but you also don't lose anything. So there's still the nuance there that subquests had. So I don't know, make your own subquests. It's not the same. It doesn't give you an extra goal to go for. And just random hunts like with friends, you know, okay, well, it wants me to cut the tail. I don't normally cut tail, so I'll cut the tail for the subquest. Why not? Just have fun. But other than that, there's not really much of a use for it other than, you know, extra rewards, which can be useful. But they're highly dependent on what you're looking for. Like, obviously, if the monster has a tail cut subquest, and you're looking for like a headpiece or something, like, you know, a horn, then it's not going to be that useful for you if you're looking for the horn to get that. I guess if you wanted it to sell, you could do that. I don't know, but that's pulling at straws, I feel, at the very least. All right, limping away to his base, we take him off by cutting the stub of his tail, I guess. I did cut the tail off at some point. Again, don't need it, but it is nice to at the very least get the cut. Either way, again, tangent aside, another one that happened this hunt, I'll go ahead and cover him up and meet you back at base. All right, back to the hub. We can go ahead and look at the weapons all together now. I'm sure you can expect, as per usual, nothing really special. But the first one is the Kutku Cutter Cross R. 185 melee attack with 28 melee fire. Negative 10% affinity. Yeah, that's kind of gross. So, I don't know if you're going out of your way to make this or just making like the standard Ignitor weapon. Again, most of these weapons that we're going over, I don't know, maybe there's niche cases in hunter scenarios, but for cats, you just fly through the game so quickly. A lot of these side weapons, which have to be there because the monster's there, you're just, you know, not going to make a weapon for it, but they feel so worthless, unfortunately, unless you're like really taking your time going through every single little thing. And even then, a lot of times there's still not even upgrades over what you could have very easily just by going through the normal campaign. So I'm gonna try to lower my expectations of what's here, but again, it's not anything you're using. The boomerang side's even worse. You have less fire element, so don't use this. As for the next one, it is the Gypceros Glare Cross R. Same raw, actually, on the melee side. It is a close range weapon, which is bad for what it is. So 20 melee poison. That's also, I think, okay. Negative 15% affinity. Not good at all. And that amount of poison can once again probably be better on some other weapons. I'm sure some high rank weapons have better poison than that. And you're not using it for boomerang because it's just lower. Awful. Not great. Not great. Not great. I guess if you're looking for a poison weapon, but again, I think you can find some better in high rank than that on the poison side. Maybe not on the raw side, but if you're focusing on raw going and moving up through the ranks, focus on element, please. The Ludroth Paw Cross R is our last one. 5 less affinity, or sorry, 5 less raw on the melee side at the very least, but has white sharpness. So it does, I believe, come out on top there on pure raw. Not a lot of water element though, only 18, and once again, negative 15% affinity. This is a common theme throughout the hyper monster weapons. They a lot of times have negative affinity. There may be a few that have actually positive affinity or more than their standard counterpart at the very least, but they may have lower raw or lower sharpness, just kind of to counteract that. But in general, the idea is that it's a higher raw version of the regular one, maybe with a bit more element, but usually with less affinity than the other one. As for the boomerang side, once again, just worse. You get 2 less water element. So again, you're not working on these or focusing on these. So it's kind of sad, but And even looking at the Garuga Fan Cross, which I believe is unlocked at the same point in G2, you're losing out on what, 4 poison element, which does not mean that much when you're using boomerangs, piercing boomerangs specifically, and you get that much more raw, which is only 4 more raw, I think, than the close range side. But look at the affinity. It's at neutral affinity. You're not getting a negative affinity. So I don't know. But as for the armor, I'm not going to say much about the armor. I think you probably get the idea. 126, 10 water resistance. 126, 10 thunder resistance. 126, 10 fire resistance. So the resistances are pretty interesting. Obviously, they're going to go down on the body pieces. But I don't know. If you've randomly been hunting with your friends and you have the option to make it, I guess they can't hurt if you're really starving for some weird element resistances, I guess. But I can't recommend to make them. Another thing to note is that those are not all of the hyper monsters in G2, but those are the ones that I have unlocked so far. There's only 4 of them that kind of just naturally get unlocked, as you can see, since there's no like special quest marker or anything like that. So GU is a big game. That's pretty much what it's notorious for. So unless you're doing all of the quests one by one, or you've played Generations and then moved to Generations Ultimate with like a full, quest log or something like that, you're not going to have a lot of them unlocked. You'll have to target the specific ones you need for whatever parts you're needing. So like I had to do with Hyperlegiacris to make the anchor, you had to do a quest line through low, high, and then G rank just to be able to get that quest. Bit annoying. I understand the concept behind it, but with how big of a game GU is, you're going to be missing a lot of stuff unless you are target doing it or just doing everything all at once, which is very easy to burn out for. Either way, hope you enjoyed. If you did, please consider leaving a comment below and maybe even consider subscribing. Until next time, bye.